Hi, this is AD Burrows here for CG Masters, and today we'll take a look at creating a tiling texture in Blender. Now there is a lot of different ways to do this, and it depends on exactly what you're going for, and in this case we're going to create a tiling coins texture. The method explored here could be useful as a shorthand for wealth in some promo or other, or perhaps this could be used as a satirical prop, or instead of coins, use any object of your choosing. So tiling textures, let's begin. So first we're going to need our object, and in this case the coin. So you can keep things really simple if you like and grab one from Blend Swap, but because I like it, I'm going to use this coin here that's modeled, sculpted, baked, textured and all that sort of business from my recent environment DVD. Though I'll show a quick coin creation process now that may cover a few interesting things for you. So I'm just going to shift this over to the second layer with the M key, and then that cleans things up while we work. I'm just going to go Shift A, add in a mesh cylinder to start with, and then tab into edit mode, press S and then Z to scale that right down to sort of a coin kind of a proportion. Then I can tab back into object mode. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to tab back into edit mode and press Ctrl R, add an edge loop down here by left clicking to confirm. Then I can go Control Tab, select the faces, Alt right click that edge loop, press X to delete, and then also delete that bottom face. And then that's pretty much all we need to work on, so we're not duplicating our effort on the other side. To help with this, I'm just going to come over to the modifiers tab and add a mirror modifier then, but not the X-axis, the Z-axis. So that gives us the coin back again. So now I'm going to tab into edit mode. I'm going to highlight that top face. I'm going to press Control B to just bevel that face, and then with the middle mouse wheel I'm going to scroll that up to give me about 3 segments, and that looks about right. Also I'm going to press T to bring up the tool shelf and smooth this, and that looks pretty good, but I'm going to grab that top face and press I to inset, and then maybe about there, and left click to confirm, and then grab this central face, press E to extrude down, and then let's scale that in with S, with the S key again, maybe something like that. And then I'm going to press Control Tab to switch to edge select mode, Alt right click that edge loop there and press Control B, and then we'll do the same with the middle mouse wheel, about 3 segments, left click to confirm, and that looks about right. This top face is looking a bit smooth, you can see the transition there, and well, you can't see any transition there I should say, and so I'm just going to shade that as hard, so I'm going to go Control F and then shade flat, and then now you can see that that edge is kind of like split at the moment, and so it gives us a nice hard faceted look to that central face or the interior of the coin. And that is pretty much it. You can kind of call it there if you want to keep it simple again, but we're just going to have a little bit more fun with this and put a face of significance or importance on there. And so I'm just going to press G, middle click, slide that off to the side on the X-axis just to work in the center here on our own. There is a face that we can use here, which is going to be fairly standard Blender territory, and so we can go Shift A to add the monkey Suzanne, and I'm going to press R, X, and then rotate that negative 90 degrees, and then it's looking a little on the blocky side, so I'm going to press Control 3 to just totally smooth that out by 3 subdivisions. Control 2 would be to switch through the various levels there. I'm just going to use Control 3 though, and that just automatically applies this subdivision modifier on for us. I'm just going to set this to shading smooth because you can still see that it's quite faceted otherwise, and that's good enough. So what we need to do is I'm going to use this as a displacement map, the face for it. So I'm going to press Shift A and add a plane to bake onto. I'm going to press 7 on the numpad to just scale things so that the monkey is going to be just about in view there, just about cover the full extent of the plane, and that is looking about right. Let's just drop that monkey below the plane. What we're going to want to do is then press Tab into edit mode, press U to unwrap that, and then now we've got some UVs. And now I'm going to left click and drag this and split this window, change this to an image editor, then tab back into edit mode and we can see our UVs. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to press a new, and then this is going to be a called bake is fine. Now this needs to be 32-bit. as we're baking a displacement. So if we don't bake 32-bit, we're not going to be able to save out enough detail, and it's going to start looking a bit faceted and banded. I have a test somewhere that I might be able to show you about this. Here is a monkey displacement texture map which has been created as 32-bit, and you can see this is how it draws. It's nice and kind of smooth. If I undo that and switch the sculpt draw brush to one where the displacement image on it isn't 32-bit and then try to redraw that out, you may be able to see you get kind of all this strange banding, and that's because there's not enough detail really to make a clean displacement as you sculpt back in. So that's just something to bear in mind. So we do need that 32-bit there. So just press OK, and now we have our bake at 1024. That's fine. And now I'm going to right click this monkey head and then shift select the plane. And then what we need to do is be over in Blender Render to be able to get to our bake settings down here. We need our displacement. In the cycled rendering engine, we don't have, we don't have a displacement option in here. So we could actually fake this with a normal map, in fact, but I'm just going to show you a displacement because this might be more useful in certain circumstances. So what we can do, just make sure it's normalized and we've got selected to active on, and then the default settings otherwise should be fine. And then let's just bake. No objects or images found to bake to shows that I've completely neglected to make sure that this bake image, the bake.001 image that we've just created, is in the background of the UVs there. So let's just try that again, just bake. And then there we go, we now have our displacement map. The problem with this displacement map is the fact that we don't want all this to be white in the background. We need that to be black, because otherwise it's going to look like it did in that test here, where you can kind of see it kind of indents and then starts to come back out again. We don't want that. We want it just to draw straight out. So what we want to do is to actually save this file off. So we can go File, Save as Image, and then I'm just going to save this. I'm going to resave this as Bake New, and then that's Displacement 1. And then let's just save that. Make sure this is 16-bit. Save as image. And then I'm going to come over to this plane. I'm going to give this a material and make this black. And then this monkey head, I'm going to give this a material and make sure this is white. And now when we go to bake our textures, we can do exactly as we did before. Just bake, and then now we basically get an alpha map in a way. So I'm going to now save that, save as image, displacement 1, I'll just call that _A, save as image. Now what we're going to need to do to combine these together, I'm going to actually open up another version of Blender. Although we could do this in Krita or Photoshop for that matter, as that supports 16-bit as well. But we can do this in Blender as well. So let's just go into the node editor and then switch to the scene and then go use nodes. We don't need the render layer. What we need is our images. So input the image and then open up the textures. And this was the displacement. Open that image and then we have it. Just plug that in and then Control Shift click on there just to add the viewer, and then I'm going to duplicate that with Shift D and then switch that one to the alpha, and then all we need to do is press Shift A, add color mix, and this is kind of like a basic version of Photoshop now, so we can now put that on top, but we don't want a mix. In fact, let's turn the backdrop on so we can see what's happening there. Let's put it down in the corner, and then we have the mix, and then we can set that to multiply, and there we go, we've got that finished. Now the problem is our resolution by default is not the same, so I'm going to change that to 1024, change that to 100%. Now to move this around, you can Alt middle click and then Alt V and V to scale that up and down there, by the way. Just in case you weren't aware of those shortcuts in the node editor, and the screencast keys I don't believe works in here anyway. So I'll just point that out. So now all we need to do is just render that out with F12. And now we have our new map that we need. And this is going to be the combined version. So I'm just going to call that combined, save as image. And now let me make sure that I didn't do something stupid and I missed the fact that it would need to be 16-bit, and I did. So let's just redo that, make sure that's 16-bit, and then save as image. Now let's test this. So I'm just going to give us a little bit more space and move those guys off to the side, and then go Shift A, add a mesh plane, and then I'm going to tab into edit mode, press W to subdivide a couple of times. And from here, I'm going to let the modifier do it. So add modifier multi-resolution, and I'm going to choose a simple algorithm so it doesn't try to smooth the shape. I just want it to add subdivisions so that we have something to sculpt on. So about 100,000 tries is fine, I think. I'm going to shade it smooth as well. I'm going to go full screen for just a moment and switch to the sculpt mode. Full screen is gotten to with shift space, by the way. And then over here, I'm going to switch to the sculpt draw brush. And then a couple of settings that we can change in this is just to make it a, let's do the texture first. In fact, I already have a texture example in there already. But I'm going to click a new one and then come over to the textures tab and then open up that new texture that we just created. Open image. And now I'm going to try drawing in here, and that is sort of okay. The things that we need to make sure, I think I may have changed these settings already, but basically what we're going to need is the stroke method to be anchored, and we need our curve to be flat. So just make sure that that's the case, and all the other settings are basically fine. And then just 7 on the numpad just to take a look from the top view there, and then we can scale it out, and that's not looking quite right. Let's give ourselves a little bit more subdivisions. So 200,000 tries. Let's see how that's looking now. So that's fine. We're not getting that weird banding anymore, but we are getting a little bit of aliasing happening, and I don't think that's quite right at the moment. I think I'm going to subdivide one more time actually. So, okay, so we've got 500,000 tries. Just draw that out. And that's looking pretty smooth. I'm just going to hold shift to just smooth this out even further in places, just so it looks kind of like it's been worn away in some places. Gold is pretty soft, so that should be okay. Almost the inverse of that actually would be to come over to the flatten contrast brush and then set it to contrast, and then just draw away in some details that you quite like the idea of sharpening or emphasizing in some way. And that should do. All we need to do then is switch back to our object mode and add, in fact we don't need to add a plane, we can just go Shift D, raise that above and delete the resolution. Delete the modifier there, just tab into edit mode, unwrap this, and then what we can do is come back to our bake plane and then shift select first the sculpted plane, shift select the plane that we're baking onto, and then come back over to our baking, and we're going to bake the displacement again, and then again normalized, selected to active, bake. And then we have our bake there. So I'm just going to go image, save as image, and then I'm going to call that, let's say it's sculpted. Let's move on. That's all we need on that. Let's come back over to our coin and let's switch over to cycles and go into edit mode, and then on that top face we can go U and then just unwrap, and you can see it's basically put the UVs in the perfect place for us. So a couple of things, I'm just going to close out that window. I'm going to add a new window down here and change that to being a 3D view, and let's get a close in on that coin, maybe give this a tiny bit more space like that. Scroll in. Sometimes the view looks a little bit weird when you zoom right in like that, so I'm just going to widen this up a bit, and then like something like that should be okay. And then when we go Shift Z, sorry, to have a look at the rendered view, that looks about right. This though is going to be a node editor, so let's switch that. Make sure that we're on materials, add a new material. This is the standard white diffuse that you get. Now the truth is, all we need is a glossy shader really, and then just plug that in instead. Make it a golden color in the reflection color, and drop the roughness right down, and that should be a pretty good standard gold metal material. And that's okay to look at, but it'd be very, very helpful if we could, especially for metals and something highly reflective, if we could have some sort of HDR environment image to help reflect. So let's switch over to the environment map and then Shift A to add in an texture, environment texture. And where I go for these kinds of things is hdrlabs.com. And on here we've got Alex's apartment, or Chelsea Stairs might work quite well as a couple of interiors. So let's just open those. I'm just going to use the preview image. Hopefully that speeds things up for us. And then just plug that in. And then let's Shift Z. And then you can see now we have an environment, and we can kind of see the reflection of the television in there now. I'm going to switch over to the object again, the coin object. And then if we reduce our roughness right down, you can see it's basically a perfect mirror really, apart from it's being tinted the gold color. So I'm just going to make that slightly rougher though. And that's pretty good. It's not completely finished though, of course, because we need to add our bump map. So I'm going to add the vector bump and plug that into the normal socket. And of course we need our image. So image texture, and then open that bump map that we used. So we have our sculpted displacement, and now we can open that image and then plug that in to the height, and you can see now it's starting to show up. Let's put the distance at full, and then you can really see that. I'm actually just going to drop the strength of it down though a little bit, just to kind of have it sit in a little bit more. And that is basically it. Something else that we could do to improve this though is to just so that it's not so perfect, I'm actually going to add a mix shader, drop that in between the glossy and the material output, plug our diffuse into the first slot. So 0 is all diffuse, right, full 1 is the second socket, so the glossy, and I'm just going to drop that to maybe around a high 8, 0.8 or so, and make the diffuse a golden color as well. In fact, what we can do is go Control C and then Control V to just keep those colors pretty much the same, and that's just going to drop it down a little bit. In fact, let's just make that slightly paler perhaps. And that looks to be pretty good as well. Just so that it looks like it's not so pristine, I'm going to add a noise texture into the roughness socket here. So I'm just going to go texture, image, noise texture, and then add that. In fact, what we can do is, if you have the Node Wrangler add-on enabled, which comes in by default with Blender, the Node Wrangler, add that on, and then if we press the properties sidebar with the N key, we can see we have all these options down here, and there's a couple of pretty good shortcuts, which is Control Shift clicking on a node will show us it in the viewport very quickly and easily. And basically all that is plugging it into an emit shader, and then we can Control Shift click the final mix shader just to switch back again. So we can see that that was a reasonable kind of smudgy looking thing. So we can plug that into a color ramp, so a converter color ramp, and then plug that into the roughness. And then also we can see we now have the power to maybe try and emphasize that or not. Maybe give that a little bit more contrasty appearance like that, and then plug that in. So let's take a look at this now. And you can see we're getting some interesting roughness variation in that now. The issue with that is I like to have quite an easy way to just mix back in the the lack of roughness, as it were. So I want to add in black. So I'm going to do that now with the color mix RGB node. So I'm going to turn that to black, and then I'm going to start to add that back in. So just the roughness and so on is kind of subtle, as you can see there. So that's it without the noise whatsoever. And then I'm just going to bring that in just ever so slightly in places. Something like that. In fact, let's make this mostly black. So let's bring it like maybe something like that. So let's just Control-Shift-click the end again. And then begin just playing with this a little bit more again. Maybe something like that. Maybe very high. And so we just get just a slight amount of sort of smudginess to it. Something else that I'm going to do is just change the texture coordinates. So I'm going to go add in the input texture coordinates and set it to object. Generated is what it is already. So I'm going to set this to object. And then you can see that we get something which is a little bit more even right across the whole thing. And I'm also going to still reduce that more by just really only ever so slightly bringing that in like that. Okay, so let's put these two coins together. So I'm going to close out this window first. So I'm going to left click and drag up and then down just to collapse that, and then switch this to a 3D view. This stuff here we don't really need, so I'm going to press B to border select across it and press M to move it to the last layer. And then I'm going to bring back our original coin, and then with shift left clicking on that layer, on the second layer, this coin I'm just probably going to scale that down slightly smaller just so that they're slightly different sizes from what I can tell. And then I'm going to just press G and then move them off to the side. So I'm going to also just apply the scale with Control A. Hopefully that sort of resolves any potential issues there. So what we need to do is we need to place these into a box, or a lot of these for that matter, so that we get a load of coins which we can then make tile. So let's press Shift A and then add a mesh cube, scale that right up. So we're getting quite a distance there, and that looks about right. Then I'm going to take the top off it. So I'm just going to delete that face, and you can see because I've got this display shading, wherever it is, the shading option backface culling enabled, you can see that the normals are facing the wrong way, of course. So I'm going to press A to select them all, and then press Control F just to bring up the faces menu, and then flip the normals. So now that they're facing the right way basically. And then let's grab these two coins, maybe move them a little bit further. And now I'm going to press Alt D to create instances of these. So this way it keeps our file size down and also makes things a little bit easier in general. And then I'm going to press G and slide those above. So these are the three things that we need. I'm just going to raise that up a little bit as well. And basically this is the box. So let's press T to open up our tool shelf, come over to the physics, add a passive physics type to that object, and also for these two coins we're going to add an active. And now what we can do is just come over to the scenes tab, and then you can see that the steps per second is 60 at the moment. Let's just press Alt A to see what happens, and you can see they just pass straight through at the moment. I'm going to just rotate these off to the side a little bit first by double tapping R just to enter the trackball rotation. And then you can see now they actually land a little bit better. So sometimes you get funny results if things are so perfectly aligned that they don't quite get recognized. But something else which helps is to just increase the steps per second in the calculations. And something else that we can see if we come over to the side here is that it's actually penetrated through the bottom. So let's take a look at some more of the physics settings. So this is set to convex hull. I'm going to set these to cylinders instead, which is the closest interpretation of what that actually is. That should hopefully run smoother. And now let's run that again, see what happens. And that is running fairly smooth. And also you can see that it is actually raised above, and you can see that it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 0.04 in its margin there. So we can actually reduce that down to 0 and see if it now comes in alignment with that and if there's any issues. So let's just run that again. That looks like it's running pretty fine. And to just return to the start frame, by the way, I'm just pressing shift and left arrow just to bring us back to the start and just get ready to recalculate. What we can do is from the top view, I'm going to press Alt D to duplicate instances and then rotate them around, and then Alt D again, rotate them around, and just do that a few times. So that seems to be about fine. And then what I can do is grab all these guys. I'm going to press B and then middle click that cube box, and also we don't need the lamp either, so I'm just going to press B and then middle click across that. And then from the front orthographic I can go Alt D and then start to raise these up like this, just to create loads and loads of instances of these coins. And for all these at the top here, I'm going to now randomize their transform slightly under the rotation there. So just fiddle with these until you get something which makes them look fairly unique, and that will help just get a general overall sort of combination in here. So let's just deselect these, shift left arrow to the start of the simulation, and then Alt A to play it and see what happens. And you can see we're getting a fairly full coverage there, but it looks like we need a tiny little bit more. So I'm going to go shift left arrow, and then let's just grab all these, and then Alt D, lift them straight up, constrain to the Z, another one, and then that should do. Let's see how that goes. Alt A. Let them settle a little bit so there's none quite jumping in the air when we come to capture things. And then it doesn't matter if they're jiggling ever so slightly, but that is fine. That is all we need. If we go, what we can do is actually hide this now. Let's find it, the cube there, and then we can just, I'm going to shut off both renderability and visibility in the viewport here, and then what we could do is just go Shift Z to take a look at this, and you can see there's our stack of coins. Now this is great, we could take a really nice texture from this already very, very easily, but if we wanted this to tile, it's still not quite ready. What we're going to need for that is a couple of things. So let's just take our key instances there and just move them off to this layer here. So now it's time for our tiling magic. So first of all, we don't need that lamp, so I'm going to delete that. And then I'm also going to create a mesh plane, raise that up, and then we can basically bake onto this plane if we want to. And let's find the scale, the size that we can get to with this, which is to about there. Let's see what dimensions that is, about 7.5. So with that, I'm actually just going to move that out of the way just for a second, and then just scale these guys up a little bit more, something like that. And then let's bring that back and then scale that up to 8, because I want this to be quite an even number. For which we'll see why in a moment. So I'm just going to move that out of the way again, and then just scale that down slightly like that, and then that should be about right. Yeah, let's see if we can get away with that. What we can do is, if we need to bake anything, we can bake onto that, but that wouldn't actually be a tiling texture. I'm just going to press H to hide that. To get it to tile, what we want to do is take a look at the dimension. Note that this is 16 units. So what we want to do is move this stuff by 8 units along and 8 units down, and then have 4 versions of them, and then that should be it. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab all these coins and I'm going to put them in a group instance. So press Control G and then press T, and then let's take a look at our create new group there, or you could just press F6 just to bring that up at the location of the cursor. And I'm going to call this coin group. And then what we can do then is, in fact, just as we are at the moment, I'm going to just make sure that we're set to the 3D cursor, which the 3D cursor is at the center of the world. As you can see there, 0, 0, 0. And what we can do is we can press GX8, and that's okay. Left click to confirm that, and then GY8, but not positive. I'm just going to move it down for now, so -8, and then press enter. And that's now in the correct position. And what we can do is then add a group instance of the coin group, and then move that onto the layer 3, and then shift select layer 3 so that we can easily kind of isolate these if we want, and then press G and then X -8. In fact, we need it to be -16 from there, to be honest. G X -8 again, and then let's duplicate that with Alt D, and then we want to go G and then Y 16. Duplicate again with Alt D, well, which is instancing really. G, X, and then 16. And then we have this will now tile. So if we Alt H to bring back our plane there, in fact, this stuff we can move again. Let's move that onto one of the last layers. So we can see we have our plane there. If we take a look from the top view, this should now tile. So let's just test that theory and find something which is tiling. So we can see that we have a silver coin over here at the very top. So we would expect to see the same sort of silver coin right down at the bottom here, sort of halfway, which we do. And same with a tiny little bit of one of the more golden ones that we can see here. So we would expect the rest of it to be down at the bottom, which looks to be about right again. So this is tiling, but as you can see, if we hide this plane, that's not particularly great because we have kind of these bunched up coins and so on at the very edges. So what we can do is we can shift select that third layer again, and we can start to delete some of these things that we know we don't want. So I'm just going to come through and delete a lot of those at the very, very edges, which aren't that great for us. So just go through and select these, which are right up on their ends because of the nature of how we got these to work. So let's just get rid of all those. I'm going to press X and delete. Now if I just shift select that third layer again, you'll note that those other ones have gone as well. But again, you'll see that there's a lot which are overlapping still. So right from the start, go right the way up and just try and start deleting ones, making sure that they're on the first or second layer. And then as I go through and delete, we shouldn't get any which are overlapping. Incidentally, if we try and move one, we should see them all move. So that helps for the tiling as well, obviously. One thing that we can do is we can, of course, bake onto here, but we can also do something else, which is to set up the camera so that we can use that for capturing renders as well. So press 0 on the numpad to take a look through the camera. That's not the right thing for our texture, the resolution, so we need 1024 by 1024. Let's make that 100%. And this is not the right angle, so I'm going to do Alt R and Alt G and then press GZ twice to just bring it out here. So now we can see that we're pretty much in the right place. Alt G and Alt R are just resetting the location and rotation values. And the thing with this camera is we need it to be an orthographic camera, and we need the orthographic scale to be 16, and now that will perfectly fit the extent of our plane. So we can now select that plane and hide it for a moment, and then also we can grab the this alpha setting here and then increase it so we can kind of just isolate what we're going to get in our texture. Okay, so that's it. That's our tiling texture. Now we just need to make our renders and bakes, and then we're pretty much done. So let's do our bakes. The first thing that we can do is, I'm just going to bring back that bake plane, in fact. Now, we could bake in cycles, but the reason we've set up our camera like that, looking straight down, is so that we don't really need to. Now, there's a couple of reasons for that. One is if I have all these separate objects and then want to bake onto this plane, that's going to take a lot of time. It kind of calculates each object differently at a separate time, and so if we combined these all into one, that wouldn't be an issue. But let's say, for example, you want to keep these all instanced and individual objects, then that's potentially going to be a problem. So we want to have that camera render them instead. There's also another advantage to that as well, by the way, which is if we press Shift Space, and then, in fact, I'm going to split the view here and then create a node editor. And if we come over to the Scenes tab and use the nodes, and we come over to the passes, you can see we have all these various passes that we could select if we wanted to. And then we've got direct, glossy, transmission, and subsurface, emission, environment. And you can see all of these things are kind of getting added to this. And rather than coming over to the bake panel and then baking the type, say combined or any one of these, you would have to do that separately each time. And instead, what we can do is with this, again, I'm going to find this in the outliner there and name this to bake plane so it's easier to find. And I'm just going to just turn all those off for a moment and then look through the camera and then press F12 to render. And then you can see it kind of busily working away. A couple of other notes are, if you're going to use the GPU compute, you probably want a larger tile size, because that should speed things up slightly. So 64 is maybe a little bit small for this. So I could do with raising that to say 512, and this would render out faster. But seeing how it's rendering slower, it gives me a chance to kind of indicate that information. So that is it rendered now, and you can see that that's our tiling texture, which looks pretty good. But you can also combine these in any number of ways. So if we add the backdrop here and then press Ctrl Shift click on there to add a viewer node, which is what is being shown in the backdrop there, and we can now press Ctrl Shift to just toggle through all these various layers. And you can see some of them are blank, some of them have information on, some of them have all these various different things that you can, you're able to do. And then maybe if you're not going to use some, you don't have to obviously include them, but it doesn't really slow the render down. It just gives you opportunities now to be able to combine these. I know it's a little bit noisy. The way to increase that would be to come over to our sampling and then just increase this to say 50, which is what I'll do for the final texture. But for this case, obviously even just something as low as 10 samples looks like it's doing quite well. The other thing is I would like to come back over to the node editor and come back to materials and then the world. And then I don't want the environment map to influence it anymore, just a mid-gray color. That should sort of create this texture for us, which is what I want to mix in with the normals and the occlusion bake. The thing is that with this highly reflective material that we've got here, I'm pretty much just going to use, I'm just going to use a very, very simple gold color. For now, I'm just going to re-render this out again. So I'll be back in a moment. In fact, just before I do that, I'm going to do what I said I would do, which is just change this to 512 and then re-render. Okay, so we're back. We have this texture now, which is essentially our cycles bake, even though we've rendered it. And I can go image and I'll save as image, and then let's just call this cycles render. In fact, let's call that coins cycles render. Save that as a 16-bit image, just keep things as high res as we can at the moment. Now that we've taken the main diffuse render, what we can do is we can set this up so that we can just pull the ambient occlusion into the viewer node and then just place the viewer node in our image editor there. And you can see with the ambient occlusion in cycles, we're going to get ambient occlusion which is kind of inspired by the normal map and the bump map that we've got. So we can now save that image, save as image. Also, a quick correction. I've just noticed in the basic coin that we created at the start, I've not plugged in the bump to the normal socket of the diffuse, which I think is showing up in our occlusion render. So if we switch this over to the viewer node, I pressed F11 there to just bring up our last rendered thing. I don't think the monkey head is actually just showing up quite right on there, and I think it's because that the bump needs to be plugged into the normal map. So let's just give that another render, and then we'll see if that now shows through. And now we can see in the ambient occlusion that we're now getting the bump map of the monkey heads showing through. So I'll resave that as the AO render. Finally, for the normal map, I'm going to switch over to the Blender render engine, and I have a new image here just called normal, which is not a 32-bit image, by the way. For this, we're going to need the internal rendering shaders. So I'm going to come over to just select one of the coins there and then just turn off the use nodes. And that should be good for those. For the first coin, the coin from the environment DVD, the one that we've built is this one. So I'm just going to turn off the use nodes for that as well. But there's no images here, so we can select the displacement image that we had there, and that we want to influence the normals. And then all we need to do then is tab into edit mode. I'm just making sure that the normal image is in the behind of those UVs, and then I'm just going to press Z to toggle wireframe, and then border select with the B key everything that we have there, and that should select everything. And then we can now come over to here and then select our normals and select it to active, and then again the defaults should be fine, and then we can hit bake and we can see what we get. Okay, we're done, and it looks like we've got the bump from the monkey head, and we've also got it from the coin itself, and we've got it at these various different angles as well, so that all looks like it'll work quite nicely. So I'll just save that image, save as image, and then let's call this coin, and then underscore all normals. It's getting a bit messy in this folder, and then let's just save that as 16-bit just to be on the purist side. Then all we need to do is just apply all these textures onto another object and take a look at how that looks. So for that, I'm going to create a new scene. I'm going to delete that cube, add a plane, switch over to the cycles rendering engine, and let's scale this right up and tab into edit mode, press U to unwrap it, and then we're going to tab into edit mode and then press W to subdivide this, and then let's do this so that it's reasonably subdivided, maybe, and again with another subdivision, and then another few times, maybe something like that. And then I'm going to just open up another window, which will be this image editor, and that's okay. We can see all our UVs are in there nicely, and with shift space I'm going to make the 3D view maximized and switch to sculpt mode, press F to just raise the size of the brush there, and then I'm just going to, yeah, this always trips me up every time, turn off the symmetry, and then just start to sculpt in a little bit of variation to the floor there. And then also just come into object mode and smooth the shading there. And so we've got like a little bit of an undulating plane for which to play with. And now what we can do is set up our shader. So let's come over to the node editor, and we want a new material. And then if we go Shift Z, we can see our material in there. And because this is going to be super reflective, let's again make it so that we can take a look at the environment and have that use nodes, and then more to the point, have it use an environment texture like the Alex's apartment as we were before. Plug that in. And then now take a look, and we can see that we're getting that image in the background there again. And let's select the object and make sure we can see the object in the node editor. And now let's start bringing in our images. So let's input the text. So add with Shift A the texture, image texture, and then open from our folder the coin all normals. And that's going to be a non-color data. And let's just plug that into the normals there. And you can see that's doing something, but that's not how we're going to import it. But you can see it's doing something. And then we're going to use another image. And let's open up Cycles Ambient Occlusion Render. Let's just check that's the right one. That looks right. And then finally we have the diffuse bake that we got from, well, render that we got from Cycles. And then we can plug that in, take a look at that. And you can see that's what we got there. So that's fairly good. Let's just set up the shader now. So we want it to be mostly glossy. So let's add a glossy shader and a mix shader, and set the factor so that it's mostly glossy. We also want a normal map, vector normal map. That's what it's going to plug into our normal inputs for those shaders. And then we're going to set the non-color data image, which is our normal map, into that color to color. And now we can see we're getting somewhere with that now. And the color of the gold is going to be much more like this. And the ambient occlusion we're not really using, but we've got it there just in case. Let's just set our roughness right down so you really get a good look at how this is reflecting. So now for the big moment of truth where we see it actually tiling. Let's open up an image editor, tap into edit mode, and then press S to scale those UVs up a bit. Let's go Shift Z and check our rendered view to fine tune the size there. Okay, so there we go, our texture is tiling seamlessly. One last thing before I go, I'd just like to set this final shader to be more reflective, so a bit closer to using mostly the glossy shader there. And then we can take a look at this with some different lighting. Let's take a look at the world's environment lighting and then set that right down to 0.1. Then find the lamp in the scene, and then I'll move that closer down towards the plane and then select use nodes so that we can see our strength options. Then I'll go Shift Z to see the rendered result and then increase the light value to 10,000. Then there you go, that might be a more appealing lighting for this particular mountain of cash. It'd be a good idea to probably break up some sections along the silhouette and very close to the camera with the geometry versions of our coins. But for now though, let's wrap things up. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial and its result, and I hope you'll join me next time. Bye for now.